I found the credit card statement on a Tuesday morning, $53,847.62 in charges I never made, designer bags, Cartier jewelry, first-class tickets to Paris, and at the bottom, a handwritten note from my daughter-in-law. "Thanks for the trip, Mom. You're so generous." The mockery in those words hit harder than the theft itself. She didn't just steal from me. She wanted me to know she'd gotten away with it. I'm Evelyn Mercer, and this is the story of how my son's wife tried to destroy me, and how I made sure she regretted every single dollar. If you want to see how far betrayal can travel, drop your city in the comments below, and hit that like button. You're going to want to see how this ends. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper, the kind that whispers money before you even open it. I should have known right then that something was wrong. It arrived on a Tuesday. Garbage day, not that it matters, but I remember because I was still in my bathrobe when I heard the mail slot click. The house was quiet. It was always quiet now. Had been for 8 months, ever since Richard's funeral, when the last of the well-wishers finally stopped calling, and I was left alone with the grandfather clock in the hallway, and the echo of my own footsteps on hardwood floors that suddenly seemed too big, too empty, too full of the life we'd built together and would never build again. I picked up the envelope. Heavy cardstock, my name printed in clean corporate font. Mrs. Evelyn Mercer, American Express, Business Platinum. I hadn't used that card in over a year, maybe longer. It was tied to the company account, Mercer and Associates. The consulting firm Richard and I had built from nothing, back when we were young and stupid and brave enough to think we could take on the world. After he got sick, I'd pulled back, let things run themselves. The business practically managed itself by then anyway. Steady clients, reliable income, the kind of empire you build when you actually know what you're doing. But I hadn't touched that card, I was sure of it. I opened the envelope standing right there in the foyer, still holding my cold coffee in the other hand. The statement was 12 pages long. I read the first page, then the second. Then I sat down on the bottom step of the staircase because my legs stopped working. Bergdorf Goodman, $4,231.18. Tiffany and Coates, $8,945. Cartier, $12,600. Air France, first class, 2 tickets, $16,847. Hotel Plaza Athénée, Paris, $8,224.44. Louis Vuitton, $3,000, on and on and on. Pages of it. Luxury brands I recognized, restaurants I'd never heard of, spas, boutiques, a private car service in Paris. The total at the bottom of the last page made my stomach drop. $53,847.62, and clipped to the statement with a rose gold paperclip, rose gold, Jesus Christ, was a handwritten note on monogrammed stationery, thick, expensive paper, her initials embossed at the top in looping script, SHM, Selena Hart Mercer. The note said, "Thanks for the trip, Mom. You're so generous. We had the most amazing time. Dylan says you always told him family comes first. I'm so glad we're finally close." I stared at those words until they stopped making sense. Read them again and again. The mockery wasn't even subtle. It was right there, dripping off every word. "Thanks for the trip, Mom," like I'd offered. Like this was some generous gift from a doting mother-in-law instead of what it actually was. Theft, fraud, a credit card stolen from my desk drawer, my name forged on charges I'd never approved, my money earned from years of 16-hour days and client meetings and proposals written at midnight, spent on a Paris vacation I didn't even know was happening. And she wanted me to know. That was the part that made my hands shake. She wanted me to see this, wanted me to know she'd done it, wanted me to understand that she didn't think I'd do a damn thing about it. I sat there on the stairs for 20 minutes, just holding that statement, reading that note over and over. I'm so glad we're finally close. We weren't close. We had never been close. I'd tried. God knows I'd tried. welcomed her into the family, hosted the engagement party, paid for half the wedding even though Richard was already sick by then and the medical bills were piling up. I'd smiled through her passive-aggressive comments, ignored the way she'd roll her eyes when I spoke, bitten my tongue when she'd forget to invite me to family dinners, or show up 2 hours late to the ones she did. I told myself it was just an adjustment period. She was young. Dylan was her first serious relationship. She'd warm up eventually, but she never did. If anything, she got worse. And Dylan, my sweet, brilliant boy, who used to call me every Sunday, who used to show up unannounced with takeout and terrible movies and an easy smile, Dylan started pulling away. Calls became text. Texts became silence. Visits stopped altogether. I told myself he was busy. Newlyweds needed space. I didn't want to be that mother, the one who clung too tight, who couldn't let go. So I let go. I gave them space. I stayed quiet. And apparently, that silence cost me $53,000. I called Dylan's number. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. His voice, cheerful and distant. "Hey, it's Dylan. Leave a message." I didn't leave a message. What would I even say? Your wife stole from me and she's laughing about it? It sounded insane, even in my own head. I tried again an hour later. Voicemail. I sent a text. "Dylan, I need to talk to you. It's important. Please call me." 3 hours passed. No response. I paced the house, that statement clutched in my hand like evidence at a crime scene. Which, I suppose it was. My mind raced through 1,000 explanations, 1,000 justifications, trying to make this make sense in some way that didn't involve my daughter-in-law being an actual criminal and my son being complicit in it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone hacked the account. Maybe Selena found the card and didn't realize it wasn't hers to use. Maybe... No, the note killed every maybe. That note was deliberate. That note was a message. You can't do anything about this. You're alone. You're old. You're grieving. Who's going to believe you? I tried Dylan again at 6 p.m. Voicemail. At 8 p.m. I called Selena's number. I hadn't called her directly in over a year. She never answered anyway. Always made Dylan relay messages. But I was desperate now. She picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn." Her voice was bright, cheerful, totally unbothered. What a nice surprise. I couldn't speak for a second. The casual cruelty of it, answering the phone like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just committed felony fraud. It took my breath away. "I got a credit card statement today," I said finally. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. $53,000 in charges I didn't make. "Oh, that," she laughed, actually laughed. "Yeah, Dylan said you might notice. We were going to tell you about it, but honestly, you've been so out of it lately, we didn't think you'd even check. I left you a note, didn't I?" "Selena." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "That card is for business expenses. It's connected to the company account. You had no right, Right?" Her voice shifted, saccharine sweetness replaced by something colder. "Evelyn, let's be real here. You haven't worked in months. That business is basically dormant. And Dylan's your only son. Everything you have is going to be his eventually anyway, right? We just borrowed a little early. Think of it as an advance on his inheritance." I couldn't breathe. The audacity of it, the sheer breathtaking audacity. "I want the money back," I said, "all of it. And I want an explanation from Dylan about how Asa." "Dylan's fine with it," she interrupted. "We talked about it. He knows how hard things have been for you since Richard died. How you've been struggling with your memory, with your emotions. He agreed you probably wouldn't even notice a few charges here and there. And honestly, Evelyn, we thought it might be nice for you to do something generous for us for once. You know, since we're always the ones checking on you, making sure you're not falling apart in that big empty house." My vision blurred, not with tears, with rage. "I'm not falling apart," I said quietly, "and I did notice, and this isn't over." "Sure, honey." She was smiling. I could hear the smile. "Listen, I've got to go. Dylan and I are heading out to dinner, but we'll stop by sometime soon, okay? Maybe bring you some leftovers. You take care of yourself." She hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone, and something inside me that had been cracked and broken, and barely holding together since Richard died suddenly, hardened, crystallized into something cold and clear and absolutely unbreakable. She thought I was weak, thought I was broken, thought grief had turned me into something soft and helpless and easy to manipulate. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I'd built a company from nothing, negotiated 7-figure contracts with men who thought a woman's place was taking notes, not making deals, buried my husband and stayed standing. I'd survived things that would have destroyed softer people. And now some 28-year-old with a designer handbag habit thought she could rob me blind and laugh about it? Not a chance. I spent the rest of the night going through files, financial records, bank statements, old credit card bills I'd shoved in a drawer and forgotten about because, honestly, what did it matter? Richard was gone. The business ran itself. I had more money than I needed and nobody left to spend it on except Dylan. And he never asked for anything, so I never looked that closely at where the money was going. Stupid. I'd been so stupid. But as I dug deeper, pulling out statements from the last 6 months, the pattern became impossible to ignore. It started small, a charge here, a charge there. $300 at Nordstrom, $500 at a spa. Amounts I might have noticed if I'd been paying attention, but small enough to slip past if I wasn't. And I wasn't. I was drowning in grief, barely functional, just trying to get through each day without falling apart completely. But then the charges got bigger, bolder. $2,000 at Neiman Marcus, $5,000 at a jewelry store, a weekend trip to Napa, $3,800 on a hotel I'd never heard of, and always just under the threshold that would have triggered a fraud alert from the credit card company. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, knew how to fly under the radar, knew I wouldn't notice until it was too late. And I hadn't. Not until that Paris trip. That was the mistake. Selena got greedy, got cocky, pushed it too far. By 2 a.m., I had 6 months of fraudulent charges spread across my dining room table. The total came to just over $87,000. $87,000 stolen while I was grieving my husband, while I was vulnerable and isolated and trying just to survive each day. And the worst part, the part that made my chest ache with something deeper than anger, was that Dylan had to know. There was no way he didn't. They were married. They lived together. He'd have seen the shopping bags, the jewelry, the plane tickets. He'd been on that Paris trip. His name was on the hotel reservation. My son had watched his wife rob me blind and said nothing. Or worse, he'd helped. I made coffee at 4 a.m. because sleep was impossible, sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun come up through the window over the sink, the same window I'd stood at 1,000 times with Richard, drinking coffee and talking about our day, back when I had someone to talk to, back when I wasn't alone in this house with nothing but my thoughts and the evidence of my son's betrayal spread out in neat piles on the dining room table. My phone buzzed, a text from Dylan, finally. Sorry, busy day yesterday. What's up? I stared at those words for a long time. What's up? Like I was asking about the weather, like his wife hadn't committed fraud and he hadn't been complicit in it. I typed, we need to talk in person today. His response came fast. Can't today. Slammed at work. Maybe this weekend? It can't wait. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Mom, is this about the credit card thing? Selena mentioned you called. Look, we can talk about it, but there's no reason to freak out. It's handled. Handled. Like this was a minor inconvenience, a misunderstanding. Not theft. Not fraud. Not the systematic draining of accounts I'd spent decades building while I was too grief-stricken to notice. I didn't respond. Couldn't trust myself to type something I wouldn't regret. Instead, I got dressed. Really dressed for the first time in months. Not the yoga pants and oversized sweater I'd been living in. A suit. Navy blue, tailored. The one I used to wear to client meetings when I needed to walk into a room and make sure everyone knew I was the smartest person there. I did my makeup, fixed my hair, looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked tired, worn, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. Something sharp. I drove to Dylan's office, didn't call ahead, didn't warn him, just showed up at the tech startup where he worked as a product manager, walked past the receptionist with the kind of confidence that makes people assume you belong, and found his desk in the open plan workspace with its exposed brick and standing desks and 20-somethings drinking cold brew from glass bottles. Dylan looked up from his laptop and froze. "Mom, what are you—" "We're going to lunch," I said, not a question. Now, he glanced around at his co-workers, clearly embarrassed. "I'm in the middle of—" "Now, Dylan." Something in my voice made him shut his laptop. He grabbed his jacket and followed me out without another word. We went to a diner 3 blocks away, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like it's been sitting on the burner for 3 hours. We used to come here when he was in college, back when we actually talked. Back when I was still a person he wanted to spend time with instead of an obligation he avoided. I slid into a booth, put the credit card statement on the table between us. "Explain," I said. Dylan looked at the statement, looked at me. His face did something complicated, guilt, defensiveness, resignation, all at once. "Mom, I know this looks bad. Your wife stole almost $90,000 from me." My voice was calm, too calm. "And you knew about it, so no, Dylan, it doesn't just look bad, it is bad." "She didn't steal it." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're not using that account. The business is barely running, and Mom, you've been a mess since Dad died. We were worried about you. Selena thought if we handled some things for you, took some pressure off, by forging my signature and charging luxury vacations to my credit card. We were going to pay you back." "When?" He didn't answer. "Dylan." I reached across the table, put my hand over his. He flinched, and that small movement hurt more than anything else so far. "Baby, talk to me. What happened? When did this start? When did you stop?" "Stop what?" He pulled his hand away. "Stop thinking you were okay. Stop pretending you weren't falling apart. Mom, you barely left the house for 6 months. You stopped answering calls, stopped seeing friends. We'd come over and you'd be in the same pajamas you'd been wearing for 3 days, and the house was a disaster, and you couldn't remember if you'd eaten that day. You were not okay. So you decided to rob me?" "We decided to help ourselves since you weren't capable of managing things anymore." His voice was rising now, frustration bleeding through. "And honestly, yeah, maybe we used some of the money for ourselves. Maybe we took a trip. But you have plenty, Mom. More than you'll ever need. And Selena and I are drowning in student loans and rent and trying to build a life. And you're sitting in that huge house with more money than you know what to do with. And so you thought you'd just take it. We thought you wouldn't even notice." The words hung there between us, honest finally, brutal. "You're right," I said quietly. "I didn't notice. I was grieving. I was barely functional. And you saw that, and instead of helping me, instead of being my son, you let your wife rob me blind and told yourself it was justified because I have money and you want it. That's not—" He stopped, looked away. "It's more complicated than that." "Then explain it to me, please. Because right now, all I see is my son helping his wife commit fraud against his own mother." Dylan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, sad. "Selena said you'd react like this. She said you'd make yourself the victim, make it about the money instead of about how you've been treating us." "Treating you—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. "Dylan, I haven't seen you in 3 months. You stopped coming by, stopped calling. I've been trying to give you space, not smother you, not be the overbearing mother-in-law, and you think I'm the one treating you badly? You guilt-tripped me at the wedding," he said. "Made that whole speech about how Dad would have loved to see this. Made Selena feel like shit for having a nice day. Your father was dying and you barely visited him," I said, and watched him flinch. "So yes, I mentioned him at your wedding because he should have been there. And if that made Selena uncomfortable, maybe she should ask herself why. See? This is what she's talking about. You can't just be happy for us. You have to make everything about Dad, about the past, about how we're not measuring up to whatever impossible standard you've set." I stared at my son and didn't recognize him. This wasn't the boy I raised. The sweet kid who used to make me Mother's Day cards with crayon drawings of our family. The teenager who'd sat with me in the hospital during Richard's surgeries, holding my hand when I cried. The young man who'd given the eulogy at his father's funeral and broken down halfway through and looked at me like I was the only solid thing left in a world that had gone sideways. When had he turned into this? This stranger sitting across from me, defending theft, justifying fraud, looking at me like I was the problem? What did she tell you about me? I asked. Selena. What did she say to make you think any of this was okay? Dylan hesitated. She said you were trying to control us with money, that you'd use your inheritance as leverage to make us dance to your tune, that if we didn't establish boundaries now, you'd manipulate us for the rest of our lives. And you believed her. I believe my wife. Those 4 words broke something in me that I didn't know could still break. I sat back in the booth, suddenly exhausted. Okay, I said. Okay. Mom, I want the money back, I said. All of it. I want a detailed account of every fraudulent charge, and I want repayment within 30 days, or I'm pressing charges. Dylan's face went pale. You wouldn't. Try me. Mom, if you report this, Selena could go to jail. It's fraud. They'll prosecute. Yes, I said, they will. So you'd destroy your own family over money? No, Dylan. I stood up, left cash on the table for the coffee we hadn't touched. Your wife destroyed this family when she decided to steal from me, and you destroyed it when you chose her lies over your own mother. I'm just making sure there are consequences. I walked out of that diner and didn't look back. Got in my car. Drove home through lunch hour traffic, hands steady on the wheel, eyes dry. I didn't cry. Not yet. I had work to do. Back home, I called my lawyer. Not the family attorney who'd handled Richard's estate. Someone new, someone sharp, someone who specialized in corporate fraud. I explained the situation in clean, professional terms. Sent over the documentation. Asked what my options were. Her response was immediate. This is textbook credit card fraud. With the amount involved, we're talking felony charges, multiple counts. If you want to pursue this criminally, the DA would absolutely move forward. But Mrs. Mercer, I have to ask, this is your daughter-in-law. Are you sure you want to go that route? Right now, I want to know what my options are, I said, all of them. Option 1, criminal charges. We file a police report, hand over the evidence, let the legal system handle it. Selena would likely face jail time. Your son could potentially be charged as an accessory if they can prove he knew. And option 2, civil suit. We sue for repayment, damages, legal fees. It's less destructive, but it's also slower, and there's no guarantee of full recovery. Option 3. The lawyer paused. You handle it privately. Give them a chance to make it right before bringing in the authorities. It's risky. They might refuse or they might drag it out. But it gives you leverage. The threat of criminal charges is sometimes more powerful than the charges themselves. I thanked her, said I'd be in touch, hung up and sat in the silence of my empty house thinking. The old Evelyn, the one who'd existed 8 months ago, before Richard died, before grief hollowed her out. That Evelyn would have known exactly what to do, would have already been 10 steps ahead, strategy mapped out, contingency plans ready. That Evelyn was decisive, confident, unshakable. But that Evelyn had died with Richard, and the one who'd taken her place was smaller, quieter, afraid of being alone, afraid of losing her son, willing to accept crumbs of affection, just to have someone left who carried her last name and her blood and some fading memory of the family they used to be. That Evelyn would have forgiven this, would have swallowed the hurt, accepted Dylan's excuses, pretended everything was fine just to avoid conflict, just to keep him in her life. But staring at those credit card statements spread across my dining room table, reading Selena's mocking note for the 100th time, I realized something. That Evelyn was gone too, and I didn't want her back. I spent the rest of the week doing something I hadn't done in months. Working. Real work. I opened my laptop, logged into the company accounts, and actually looked at what was happening with Mercer and Associates. Turns out barely running was generous. The business was bleeding clients because I'd been ignoring emails, missing deadlines, ghosting people who trusted me for years. 2 major contracts had dissolved while I was drowning in grief. Our reputation was in free fall, but it wasn't dead yet, could be saved if I actually gave a damn. So I started giving a damn. I sent emails, made phone calls, apologized professionally for my absence, explained there'd been a family emergency, assured clients I was back and ready to deliver the quality work they'd come to expect. Some of them had already moved on, but some, enough, were willing to give me another chance. It felt good, felt like putting on armor I'd forgotten I owned. And while I was rebuilding my professional life, I kept digging into the financial records, kept finding more evidence, more charges, more manipulation. It wasn't just the credit card. Selena had been accessing other accounts too. Small transfers from my checking, loans from Dylan that he'd funded with money I'd given him for other purposes. A systematic, months-long campaign to drain me dry while I was too destroyed to notice. And the more I found, the clearer it became that this wasn't opportunistic. This was planned. This was someone who saw a vulnerable woman and decided she was easy prey. On Friday, Dylan called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I ignored it. He texted, "Mom, we need to talk, please." I didn't respond. I was done chasing my son, done begging for his attention. If he wanted to talk, he could come here. He could face me. He could look me in the eye and explain how he justified this. He showed up at my door on Saturday morning, alone. "Where's your wife?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. She didn't want to come. He looked exhausted. "Mom, can we please talk?" I let him in, made coffee because that's what you do, even when you're furious, even when the person in your kitchen helped rob you blind. Old habits. We sat at the table. The credit card statement was still there, along with all the other evidence I'd compiled. Dylan stared at it like it might bite him. "I didn't know how bad it was," he said finally. "I knew about the Paris trip and some of the shopping, but I didn't know about all of this. I swear, Mom, I didn't know." "But you knew enough." "Yeah." His voice cracked. "I knew enough, and I should have stopped it, should have said something. But Selena kept saying you had so much money, it wouldn't matter, and you weren't noticing anyway, and we were struggling, and I just..." He put his head in his hands. "I fucked up. I know I fucked up." "Dylan, she forged my signature multiple times. That's a felony." "I know. And you helped her." "I know." "So what do you want me to do here?" I asked. "Forgive you? Pretend this didn't happen? Let it go because you're my son and that's what mothers do?" He looked up at me with Richard's eyes, the same blue-grey, the same shape, and I saw my husband in his face, and it hurt so much I almost couldn't breathe. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know what I want. I just know I'm sorry, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway." We sat there in silence. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, someone was mowing their lawn. Normal Saturday sounds. Normal life continuing like my world hadn't just collapsed. "I'm not pressing charges," I said finally, "yet. But here's what's going to happen. You and Selena are going to repay every single dollar. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what you have to sell or what jobs you have to work. You're going to make this right." "Okay." He nodded quickly. "Okay, we will, I promise. And I want her gone, Dylan." He froze. "What?" "I don't want her in my life. Not at holidays, not at family events. She doesn't get to come to this house. She doesn't get to call me or text me or pretend we're family. She made her choice when she stole from me. Now I'm making mine." "Mom, I can't just... She's my wife." "Then you have a choice to make." I stood up, started clearing the coffee cups. "Her or me? And before you answer, before you tell me I'm being unfair or cruel or unreasonable, ask yourself this. What would your father say if he knew what she did? What would he say if he knew you let her?" Dylan didn't answer, just sat there, staring at the table. "Go home," I said. "Talk to your wife. Figure out how you're going to repay me, and decide whether you want to be the kind of man your father raised, or the kind of man who stands by while someone victimizes his own mother." He left without another word. I washed the coffee cups, cleaned the kitchen, moved through the house, straightening things that didn't need straightening, just to have something to do with my hands. And then finally, alone in the house that was too big and too empty and too full of ghosts, I let myself cry. Not for the money, not even for the betrayal, though that hurt like nothing I'd ever felt. I cried because my son was lost, because somewhere between the boy who'd held my hand in the hospital and the man who'd helped his wife rob me, Dylan had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look me in the eye and justify cruelty, someone who'd chosen a woman who saw me as a target over the mother who'd given him everything. And I didn't know if I could get him back, didn't know if I even wanted to anymore. The choice I'd given him, her or me, wasn't really a choice. I knew that. He'd choose Selena. Of course he would. They were married. They had a life together. You don't just walk away from that because your mother demands it. But I'd had to say it anyway, had to draw the line somewhere, stake some claim to my own dignity, even if it meant losing him completely. I cried until I had nothing left. Then I got up, washed my face, and went back to work. Because that's what you do. You survive, you keep going. You refuse to let the people who hurt you win by destroying you. And if that meant I'd spend the rest of my life alone in this house with nothing but my grief and my pride, well, at least I'd still have those. At least I'd still have myself. Dylan didn't call for 3 days. Didn't text. Nothing. I told myself I didn't care. Told myself I was done waiting for my son to remember I existed. But every time my phone buzzed, my stomach jumped, and every time it wasn't him, something inside me twisted a little tighter. On the 4th day, I was in the office, my actual office, the one I hadn't set foot in since Richard's funeral, sorting through client files and trying to remember how to be the version of myself who ran a successful business instead of the version who cried in empty houses. My assistant, Margaret, had stayed on even after I'd ghosted for months, keeping the lights on, fielding calls, making excuses for my absence. She deserved a raise, probably deserved a medal. Mrs. Mercer, she knocked on my door frame looking nervous. Like, "There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent." "Who is it?" Margaret hesitated. "Your daughter-in-law." Every muscle in my body went rigid. "Tell her I'm not available." I did. She said she'll wait. I sat back in my chair, staring at the contract spread across my desk. Selena was here in my office. After everything, after the theft, after the mockery, after that smug little note, she had the audacity to show up at my workplace like she had any right to be here. Part of me wanted to have security throw her out. But another part, the part that had been building strategy in the back of my mind for days, knew this was an opportunity. I wanted to see her, wanted to look her in the eye and understand what kind of person steals from a grieving widow and laughs about it. "Give me 5 minutes," I said, "then send her in." I used those 5 minutes to put on the armor, fixed my posture, steadied my breathing, pulled up every ounce of the woman I used to be before grief tried to erase her. When Selena walked through that door, she wasn't going to see a victim. She was going to see exactly who she'd decided to go to war with. Margaret showed her in. Selena looked perfect, as always. Designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Cashmere sweater. Hair blown out like she'd just stepped out of a salon. The Cartier bracelet I'd unknowingly paid for glinting on her wrist. She smiled. Warm, friendly, completely unbothered. "Evelyn, thanks for seeing me." I didn't stand, didn't smile back, just gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit." She sat, crossing her legs, still smiling. "I know things have been tense lately. I wanted to clear the air." Clear the air. I repeated the words slowly, tasting the absurdity of them. "You stole almost $90,000 from me and you want to clear the air?" I didn't steal anything. Her voice was calm, reasonable, like she was explaining something to a confused child. That money came from a joint family account, Dylan is your son. What's yours is his. We just accessed funds that were sitting unused anyway. Accessed. I leaned forward. That's an interesting word for fraud. Evelyn, let's not be dramatic. She uncrossed her legs, leaned forward too, matching my energy. You're upset. I get it. Dylan said you've been struggling, but making this into something criminal, that's not going to help anyone. Help anyone, I said, or help you avoid jail time. Something flickered in her eyes. Just for a second. Then the smile was back, but harder now. Sharper. You're not going to press charges. How do you know? Because you don't want to hurt Dylan. And if you go after me, he's implicated too. You destroy your own son's life to what? Prove a point? Get revenge? That's not who you are. She said it with such confidence, such certainty, like she'd already mapped out every move I could possibly make and found them all lacking. And in that moment, I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. Selena had never been afraid of me, not once. From the day Dylan brought her home, she'd looked at me and seen exactly what she'd told Dylan I was. A lonely old woman with money and no power, someone who could be managed, manipulated, neutralized. She'd been playing chess while I was still trying to figure out the rules. You're right, I said quietly. I don't want to hurt Dylan. But you already did that for me, didn't you? You married him, isolated him from his family, and turned him into someone who thinks stealing from his own mother is justified. So tell me, Selena, what exactly do I have left to lose? Her smile faded. You have your son. Do I? Because the Dylan I raised would never have done this. The Dylan I raised had integrity, compassion, loyalty. The man who helped you rob me, I don't know who that is. That man is your son, Evelyn, and he's choosing his wife the way it should be. Is that what you tell yourself? That this is about loyalty, about marriage? I stood up, walked around the desk, perched on the edge so I was looking down at her. You're a predator. You found a vulnerable target, a grieving widow with money, and a son who wanted to please his new wife. And you decided to take everything you could get your hands on. That's not loyalty, that's opportunism. Selena stood too. We were eye to eye now, and the pretense was completely gone from her face. What was left was cold and calculating, and absolutely devoid of remorse. You want to know the truth, Evelyn? Fine, here it is. Dylan and I were drowning in debt when we got married. Student loans, credit cards, medical bills from when his dad was sick. Bills you could have helped with, by the way, but you were too busy playing the tragic widow to notice your son was struggling. We needed money. You had money you weren't even using. So yeah, we took it, and I'm not sorry. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Medical bills from when his dad was sick. I paid for Richard's treatment, every single bill. Dylan never asked for because you made it clear you were the only one allowed to suffer. She stepped closer and I smelled her perfume, expensive, cloying. Every conversation was about you, your loss, your pain, your grief. Dylan was hurting too, but you were so wrapped up in your own tragedy you couldn't even see it. So yeah, when we found that credit card in your desk drawer, when we realized you had accounts you'd forgotten about, money you weren't even tracking, we took it, and I'd do it again. My hand itched to slap her. I'd never hit anyone in my life, but standing there listening to her justify theft as some kind of righteous redistribution, I understood why people did. Get out of my office, I said. I'm not done. Yes, you are. Get out or I call security and have you removed. She grabbed her purse, but she didn't leave, not yet. Dylan's not going to choose you. You know that, right? He already picked me. He picked me when we got married, and he picked me again every time he watched me spend your money and said nothing. You can threaten charges all you want. You can make demands, but at the end of the day, you're alone, Evelyn. And we're a family, a real one, not whatever broken thing you're clinging to. She walked out, left me standing there in my own office, shaking with rage and something darker, something that felt a lot like fear, because she was right about one thing. Dylan had already chosen her, was still choosing her. Every day he didn't call, every excuse he made, every justification he offered, those were choices. conscious decisions to prioritize his wife over his mother, his marriage over his integrity, his comfort over my dignity. I sat back down at my desk, stared at the contracts in front of me, couldn't read a single word. My phone buzzed. A text from Dylan. Selena said she stopped by. Mom, please don't be mad at her. She's just trying to fix this. I stared at that message for a long time. Fix this. Like showing up at my office to justify theft was fixing anything. Like telling me I deserved to be robbed because I was too grief-stricken to notice my son struggling was fixing anything. I didn't respond. Couldn't trust myself to type what I was actually thinking. Instead, I called my lawyer. I want to move forward, I said. Not criminal charges, not yet. But I want everything documented, every fraudulent charge, every forged signature, every illegal transaction. I want a case file that's airtight, ready to go the second I decide to pull the trigger. Consider it done, she said. And Mrs. Mercer, for what it's worth, you're doing the right thing. I wasn't sure about that, wasn't sure there was a right thing in a situation like this, but at least I was doing something. At least I wasn't just lying down and letting them destroy me. That night I couldn't sleep again. I'd gotten used to insomnia in the months since Richard died, but this was different. This wasn't grief keeping me awake, it was rage. Pure, clean, crystallizing rage that burned through the fog I'd been living in and left everything sharp and clear. At 2 a.m. I got up and went to the guest room, Dylan's old room from when he was growing up. I'd left it mostly unchanged. Still had his swimming trophies on the shelf, his high school debate team photo on the wall, the science fair ribbon he'd won in 8th grade for a project about renewable energy that Richard had helped him build in the garage over 3 weekends. I sat on the bed and looked at those artifacts of his childhood, trying to find the exact moment when the boy who'd built solar panels in our garage had turned into the man who'd help his wife rob his own mother. There was no single moment. I knew that. It was 1,000 tiny choices, a gradual erosion of character, a slow poison that Selena had been administering since the day they met. But he'd drunk it willingly. That was the part I couldn't get past. Nobody forced him. Nobody held a gun to his head and made him betray me. He'd chosen it, chosen her, chosen to believe her version of reality over the truth he'd known his whole life. My phone rang. 3 a.m. Only bad news calls at 3 a.m. It was Dylan. Mom, are you awake? Obviously. I can't sleep either. His voice was rough, tired. I keep thinking about everything, about what you said, about Dad. I didn't respond. Waited. Selena told me she went to your office today, he continued. She said you threatened her. I told her the truth. That's not a threat. That's a statement of fact. Mom, she's my wife. I need you to understand. No, Dylan, you need to understand something. I stood up, started pacing the small room. I loved your father for 32 years. 32 years of marriage, partnership, building a life together. And when he got sick, I took care of him. Every appointment, every treatment, every nightmare at 3 a.m. When he couldn't breathe and thought he was dying, I was there. And you know what he said to me the night before he died? He said, "Take care of our boy, make sure he's okay." Dylan was quiet. I could hear him breathing. I've been trying to honor that, trying to give you space, not interfere with your marriage, not be the mother-in-law horror story. And while I was trying to respect your choices, your wife was systematically robbing me. So don't tell me I need to understand that she's your wife. Tell me you understand what you've done. Tell me you understand that you broke your father's heart retroactively, impossibly, by becoming someone he wouldn't recognize. That's not fair. None of this is fair, baby. And suddenly I was crying, hot, angry tears that I couldn't stop. It's not fair that I lost my husband. It's not fair that I lost my son. It's not fair that I'm sitting in your childhood bedroom at 3 a.m, trying to figure out where I went wrong, what I did to make you think I deserved this. Mom, I want my money back, I said, every dollar, and I want a real apology, not excuses, not justifications, a real acknowledgement that what you both did was wrong. Can you give me that? Silence stretched between us. I counted heartbeats. 10, 20, 30. "I'll talk to Selena," he said finally. "About repayment. We'll figure something out. That's not what I asked." "I know," his voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know how we got here. I don't know how to fix this." "You could start by telling the truth. Did you know what she was doing the whole time?" More silence. Then, "Not the whole time. At first she just charged little things. Told me you'd given her permission. By the time I realized you hadn't, it was already so much money, and I didn't know how to tell you, and she kept saying it was fine, you'd never notice. You had so much." "Stop." I couldn't listen anymore. "Just stop. You knew enough. That's all that matters." I hung up. For a while, I just sat there in the dark, holding my phone, looking at the shadows cast by the streetlight through Dylan's old curtains. The same curtains we'd picked out when he was 12 and decided he was too old for the superhero ones he'd had since he was 6. I remembered that day. Remembered him trying to act grown up and sophisticated, picking out navy blue stripes, then catching his reflection in the store window, and making a face at himself that was pure kid. Richard had laughed and tousled his hair, and Dylan had squirmed away, but grinned too, and we'd been happy. Simple, uncomplicated happy. When had that become impossible? The next morning I made a decision. I was done waiting for Dylan to figure out his priorities. Done hoping Selena would suddenly grow a conscience. Done being the passive victim in my own story. I went back to my lawyer's office with every piece of evidence I'd compiled. "I want to know exactly what charges Selena's facing if I move forward," I said. "And I want to know what it would take to get full restitution without going criminal." My lawyer, Patricia, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd built a reputation on corporate fraud cases, spread the documents across her conference table. Criminal route, multiple counts of credit card fraud, identity theft, forgery. We're talking potential jail time, heavy fines, permanent record. Civil route, we sue for the full amount plus damages and legal fees. It's slower, but it keeps us out of the criminal system. And option 3? Patricia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You use the threat of option 1 to force option 2, but faster. Give them a deadline. Full repayment, written admission of wrongdoing, signed legal agreements preventing future contact or access to your accounts. If they refuse or miss the deadline, you file criminal charges immediately. You become the sword hanging over their heads. She'll refuse. Maybe, but maybe not. Depends how much she wants to avoid a felony record." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Mercer, can I be frank? Please. Your son is an accessory to all of this. If you go after her, prosecutors might come after him too. Are you prepared for that?" I looked at the evidence spread across the table. $87,000 in fraudulent charges, months of systematic theft. My signature forged dozens of times, my trust obliterated, my relationship with my only child destroyed. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm not going to let fear of consequences stop me from demanding justice." They should have thought about consequences before they decided I was an easy target. Patricia nodded. "Then let's draw up the terms." We spent 3 hours crafting the ultimatum. Every detail specified. Every contingency covered, full repayment within 60 days, written admission of all fraudulent charges, legal agreement barring Selena from any contact with me or access to any of my accounts, assets, or property, and a clause stating that any violation, any mispayment, any attempt to manipulate or negotiate would result in immediate criminal prosecution. It was brutal, comprehensive, exactly what I needed. "I'll have this delivered to their home," Patricia said. "Certified mail, signature required. They'll have 72 hours to respond." "No." I took the document. "I'll deliver it myself." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "That's not advisable." "I don't care. They need to see my face when they read this. They need to understand this isn't coming from a lawyer or the courts. It's coming from me." I drove to Dylan and Selena's apartment that evening. A trendy building in a neighborhood that was definitely beyond their means. Another thing that should have tipped me off. The lobby had a doorman who tried to stop me, but I told him I was Dylan's mother and he waved me through, Probably not paid enough to get involved in family drama. I knocked on their door, heard movement inside. Voices. Then Selena opened it. She looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Evelyn, what are you?" "I have something for you." I held out the envelope. "Both of you. Is Dylan here?" "He's in the shower, but I'll wait." I pushed past her into the apartment. It was nice, modern, expensive furniture that I'd probably paid for without knowing it. The Tiffany lamp I'd seen on the credit card statement sitting on an end table like a trophy. Selena closed the door slowly. "You can't just barge in here." I just did. I set the envelope on their coffee table. "That's a legal document outlining the terms of repayment for the money you stole. You have 60 days to repay every dollar plus interest. You'll also sign a legal agreement admitting to fraud and agreeing to zero contact with me going forward. If you refuse, or if you miss a single payment, I'm pressing criminal charges." Her face went pale. "You can't." "I can, and I will. This isn't a negotiation, Selena. This is the consequence you should have considered before you decided I was too broken to fight back." Dylan emerged from the hallway, hair wet, wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. "Mom, what's going on?" "Read the document." I gestured to the envelope. "Both of you, you have 72 hours to respond. After that, the offer expires and I go straight to the police." Dylan picked up the envelope, pulled out the papers. I watched his face as he read, watched the color drain, watched his hands start to shake. "Mom, we can't pay this back in 60 days. We don't have—" "You should have thought of that before you spent it." My voice was ice. "Sell the furniture, sell the jewelry, sell whatever you have to sell. Get loans, pick up extra work. I don't care how you do it, but you're going to make this right or you're going to face the legal consequences." "Evelyn, be reasonable," Selena started. "Reasonable?" I turned on her. "You want to talk about reasonable? You stole almost $90,000 from me while I was grieving my husband. You mocked me in writing. You came to my office and told me you'd do it again. And now you want me to be reasonable? You're trying to destroy our lives." "No, you destroyed your own lives when you committed fraud. I'm just making sure you pay for it." Dylan was still reading the document, flipping through pages, looking more panicked with each one. "Mom, if we sign this, if we admit to fraud in writing, that's evidence. If you change your mind and prosecute anyway, then you should have been more careful about who you decided to rob." I picked up my purse. 72 hours. Make your choice. I walked out of that apartment and didn't look back, got in my car, drove home through evening traffic, hands steady on the wheel, heart pounding but head clear. I'd done it, drew the line, made the stand. Whatever happened next was on them. The phone call started 20 minutes after I got home. Dylan first. "Mom, please, we need to talk about this, please." I let it go to voicemail. Then Selena, "Evelyn, you're making a huge mistake. Dylan's never going to forgive you for this. You're going to lose your son forever. Is that really worth some money?" I blocked her number. Then Dylan again. "Mom, Selena's freaking out. She's talking about leaving, about divorce. You're destroying my marriage. Please, just call me back, please." I turned off my phone. And then I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive stuff Richard and I used to save for special occasions, and sat in the living room in the dark, drinking it slowly, letting the silence settle around me like a blanket. Was I destroying Dylan's marriage? Maybe, probably, but I hadn't put the knife in its back. Selena had done that the moment she decided theft was acceptable. I was just making sure everyone saw the wound. And if Dylan chose to stay with someone who'd not only robbed his own mother but showed zero remorse about it, that told me everything I needed to know about who he'd become. The thought should have devastated me, should have sent me spiraling back into the grief-soaked depression I'd been drowning in for months, but it didn't. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt since Richard died. Powerful, clear-headed, in control. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was done being the target, the mark, the vulnerable widow who'd lie down and take whatever cruelty her family wanted to dish out. I was Evelyn Mercer. I'd built a company from nothing, survived 32 years in a cutthroat industry, negotiated deals with men who thought my place was making coffee, not closing contracts, buried my husband with grace and dignity even when every cell in my body wanted to scream and break things. I'd survived everything life had thrown at me so far, and I sure as hell was going to survive this. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that maybe I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. That family was supposed to forgive, supposed to work through problems, supposed to choose love over pride. But that voice got quieter every time I remembered Selena's smug note. Every time I pictured Dylan watching his wife spend my money and saying nothing. Every time I realized they'd see my grief as an opportunity instead of a reason to be gentle. You don't forgive that. You don't sweep that under the rug and pretend everything's fine. You make damn sure it never happens again. The 72 hours crawled past like 72 years. I kept my phone off, ignored the doorbell when it rang. Twice, both times Dylan's car in the driveway. I watched through the curtains as he knocked, waited, knocked again, finally left. Part of me wanted to open the door, wanted to let him in, hear him out, find some compromise that wouldn't blow up what was left of our family. But the stronger part, the part that was tired of being hurt, tired of being used, tired of sacrificing my dignity for scraps of affection, kept the door locked. On the third day at 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline, my lawyer called. They responded, Patricia said. They'll accept the terms. I sat down. They will? Both of them. Dylan signed. Selena signed. They're agreeing to full repayment within 60 days. The admission of wrongdoing, all of it. I have the signed documents in front of me. Something in my chest loosened. Not relief exactly, not victory, something more complicated. What about the no contact clause? Selena agreed. Dylan pushed back, wanted exceptions for holidays and family emergencies, but I told him it was all or nothing. He signed. I closed my eyes. Okay, what happens now? Now we monitor compliance. They have 60 days to make full restitution. If they miss a payment or violate any terms, we move forward with prosecution. But Mrs. Mercer, I think you won. Won. Strange word for a situation where I'd lost my son, my peace, my faith, that family meant anything beyond biology. But at least I'd kept my dignity. At least I'd proven I wasn't the easy target they thought I was. At least I was still standing. Thank you, Patricia, I said. Send me the documents. I want copies of everything. That night I slept through for the first time in weeks. No insomnia, no nightmares, just deep, dreamless sleep. And when I woke up the next morning, the house didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The first payment came through 3 weeks later, $10,000 deposited into the account Patricia had set up specifically for restitution. I stared at the notification on my phone, feeling nothing at first. Then something that might have been satisfaction, or maybe just exhaustion. 10,000 down, 77 to go. I should have felt vindicated, should have felt like justice was being served. Instead, I just felt hollow, because money coming back into my account didn't erase what had been taken, didn't undo the betrayal, didn't bring back the son I used to know. But I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. The real test came 2 days after that first payment, when I went to the grocery store. Mundane, normal, the kind of thing you do when you're trying to convince yourself your life hasn't completely imploded, and ran into Claire Richardson in the produce section. Claire had been Richard's business partner's wife. We'd had dinner together maybe twice a year for the better part of a decade. Pleasant enough woman, the kind of acquaintance who exists in that weird space between friend and stranger. Evelyn! She lit up when she saw me, rushed over with her cart. I've been meaning to call you. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I said. Because what else do you say? My daughter-in-law robbed me and my son helped? That's not grocery store conversation. I heard about Dylan's separation, she said, lowering her voice like we were discussing something scandalous. Linda Morrison mentioned it at book club last week. She said, Selena moved out. That must be so hard for you. I went very still. Separated? Oh, Claire's face did something complicated. You didn't know? I thought, I'm sorry, I assumed you'd heard. Linda said her daughter saw Selena apartment hunting in the city. She thought the divorce was already in progress. I gripped my shopping cart. When did Linda hear this? Maybe a week ago. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. I thought you knew. I finished my shopping on autopilot, loaded groceries into my car, drove home in a daze. Separated. Dylan and Selena were separated, maybe divorcing, and nobody had told me, not that they were obligated to. I'd demanded no contact with Selena. I'd drawn hard lines. But the fact that my son's marriage was falling apart and I was hearing about it third hand from Claire Richardson in the produce section, that hurt in ways I wasn't prepared for. I called Patricia as soon as I got home. Did you know Dylan and Selena separated? I didn't, she said, but it doesn't affect the restitution agreement. They're both still legally bound to the repayment terms regardless of their marital status. I don't care about the legal terms right now. I care that my son's life is falling apart and I'm finding out from grocery store gossip. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Mercer, you put a no-contact order in place. This is what that looks like. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing something intellectually doesn't stop it from gutting you emotionally. I spent the rest of the day trying not to think about it, trying not to wonder if I'd pushed too hard, demanded too much, destroyed whatever chance Dylan and Selena had at making things work. Trying not to feel responsible for a marriage ending when the marriage had been built on lies and theft to begin with. But the thoughts wouldn't stop, and around 7 p.m. I broke. I turned my phone back on for the first time in weeks. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, most from Dylan, a few from numbers I didn't recognize. I scrolled through them, watching the progression like a time lapse of a relationship decomposing. Week 1, Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. Week 2, I signed your papers. I'm doing what you asked. Can we please just talk? Week 3, Selena left. She said she can't handle the pressure. Said I have to choose between fixing things with you or staying married to her. I don't know what to do. Week 4, she filed for divorce. Are you happy now? You got what you wanted. That last message was from 3 days ago. Are you happy now? I stared at those words until they stopped meaning anything. Was I happy? Was that even a relevant question? I hadn't done this to be happy. I'd done it to have dignity, to refuse to be a victim, to make sure there were consequences for people who thought they could destroy me and walk away clean. But Dylan didn't see it that way. Dylan saw a mother who'd chosen revenge over family, who'd valued money over her son's happiness, who'd destroyed his marriage because she couldn't forgive a mistake. A mistake, that's what he was calling it now. Not fraud, not theft, not systematic manipulation. A mistake. I should have deleted the messages, should have blocked his number and moved on. But instead I did something stupid. I called him. He answered on the first ring. Mom? His voice cracked on the word and something in my chest cracked with it. I heard about Selena, I said. I'm sorry. Are you? He didn't sound angry, just tired, defeated. Are you really sorry, or is this what you wanted all along? Dylan, I never wanted. You gave me an ultimatum, her or you. And when I tried to find a middle ground, when I tried to fix things with both of you, you made it impossible. So she left. And now I'm alone, drowning in debt, trying to pay you back, and my marriage is over. So tell me, Mom, was it worth it? I sat down on the couch, phone pressed so hard against my ear, it hurt. She stole from me. She mocked me. She showed zero remorse. What was I supposed to do? Just let it go. You were supposed to be my mother. His voice rose, raw and jagged. You were supposed to help me figure this out, not destroy everything I'd built. But instead, you went nuclear. You made it about punishment and revenge and proving you weren't weak. And you know what? Fine. You proved it. You're not weak. You're strong and powerful, and you won. Congratulations. I hope it keeps you warm at night. Dylan's, I have to go. I have a second job interview in an hour. Need to figure out how to pay your restitution plus rent plus lawyer fees for a divorce I didn't want. Goodbye, Mom. He hung up. I sat there holding the phone, staring at nothing, feeling like I'd just been hollowed out with a spoon. He was right about some of it. I had gone nuclear. I had made it about power and control and refusing to be a victim. But what choice did I have? Roll over, accept abuse, teach my son that stealing from family is acceptable as long as you apologize afterward? No, that wasn't an option. Couldn't be an option. But sitting alone in my living room, listening to the silence that had become my constant companion, I wondered if winning had cost more than I could afford to pay. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went through old photo albums, physical ones, the kind we used to make before everything went digital. Pictures of Dylan as a kid, Dylan at his high school graduation, Dylan and Richard fishing off the pier, Dylan at his wedding, smiling at Selena like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. That photo, I stared at that one for a long time. He looked so happy, so certain, like he'd found his person, his future, his whole life crystallized in this one moment, and I'd helped destroy it. No, I didn't destroy it. Selena destroyed it when she decided theft was acceptable, when she poisoned him against me, when she made him complicit in fraud. I just made sure there were consequences. But the rationalizations felt thinner now, less solid, like I was trying to convince myself of something I wasn't sure I believed anymore. I closed the album, put it back on the shelf, tried to go about my day like I wasn't unraveling at the seams. Work helped. I threw myself back into Mercer and Associates with a vengeance, taking on new clients, rebuilding relationships I'd neglected, proving to myself and everyone else that I was still capable, still sharp, still the woman who'd built this company from nothing. And it worked. Mostly. During the day, I could pretend I was fine, could pretend the constant ache in my chest was just residual grief from Richard, not fresh agony from Dylan. But nights were different. Nights were when the doubts crept in, when I'd lie awake wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, if there had been another way, if I'd let pride and anger turn me into someone I didn't recognize. The second payment came through right on schedule, another 10,000, halfway there. I should have been relieved, should have seen it as progress. Instead, I just felt sick, because I knew what that money represented. Dylan working himself to death to pay me back, Dylan selling things he loved, Dylan's marriage ending, Dylan's life imploding, and I'd made it happen. Patricia called the day after the payment posted. Good news, she said. They're on track. If they keep up at this rate, they'll have full restitution within the deadline. Great, I said flatly. You don't sound thrilled. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel. Vindicated, Patricia suggested. Respected? They wronged you and they're making it right. That's justice, Mrs. Mercer. Is it? I stared out my office window at the parking lot below, because it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like I destroyed my family to prove a point. They destroyed your family when they stole from you, Patricia said firmly. Don't forget that. Don't let guilt rewrite what actually happened. She was right. I knew she was right. But right doesn't always feel right when you're living through it. I buried myself in work for the next 2 weeks. Took on a major consulting project that required 60-hour weeks and constant client meetings. Anything to avoid being alone with my thoughts. Anything to avoid the growing suspicion that I'd won the battle but lost something far more valuable in the process. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, my assistant buzzed my office. Mrs. Mercer, there's someone here to see you. He says he's your son. My heart jumped. Send him in. Dylan walked through my office door looking like he'd aged 5 years and 2 months. There were circles under his eyes, his shirt was wrinkled, he'd lost weight. He looked exhausted and defeated, and so much like Richard in those last weeks before the cancer won, that I had to grip the edge of my desk to stay standing. Hi, Bum, he said. Hi. We stared at each other across my office. The distance between us felt like miles instead of feet. The divorce is final next week, he said finally. Selena's lawyer expedited everything. She wanted it done fast. I'm sorry. Are you? He sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited, because I keep trying to figure out if you actually are, or if you're just saying what you're supposed to say. Dylan, I never wanted your marriage to end, but you're glad she's gone. I couldn't lie to him. Yes, I'm glad she's out of your life. I think she was poisonous for you, but I'm not glad you're hurting. He laughed. It was a broken sound. Well, mission accomplished. She's gone. I'm miserable, and I still owe you $47,000, so I guess you got most of what you wanted. What I wanted was for my son not to steal from me, I said quietly. That's all I ever wanted. I know. He looked down at his hands. I know that, and I know I screwed up. I know I should have stopped her, should have told you, should have done 1,000 things differently. But Mom, you have to understand, she had me convinced that you were the problem, that you were manipulative and controlling and using your money to keep me dependent, and I believed her. For years I believed her. Why? Because it was easier than admitting I'd married someone who didn't care about anyone but herself. His voice cracked. Because accepting that would mean accepting that I'd made a massive mistake, that I'd chosen wrong, that Dad tried to warn me at the wedding and I didn't listen. I went very still. Dad warned you. 3 days before we got married, he pulled me aside, said he had concerns about Selena, said she seemed more interested in our family's money than in me. I got defensive, told him he was just being overprotective. We had this huge fight. He said if I married her, I'd regret it, and I told him. Dylan's voice broke completely. I told him to stay out of my life, and then he got too sick to fight anymore, and we never talked about it again, and then he died. And I spent the last 8 months telling myself he was wrong about her, because admitting he was right would mean admitting I'd wasted our last real conversation defending someone who was using me. I came around the desk, sat in the chair next to him instead of across from him. Baby, Dad didn't die mad at you. He was worried, but he wasn't mad. How do you know? Because the night before he died, when he told me to take care of you, he also said, and be patient with him about Selena. He'll figure it out eventually. He knew, Dylan. He knew you'd see through her eventually. He just didn't know it would cost so much. Dylan put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. And I did what I'd wanted to do for months. I reached over and put my hand on his back the way I used to when he was little and scared and needed to know someone was there. We sat like that for a long time, him crying silently, me rubbing his back, the office quiet around us. I found something, he said eventually, voice muffled. When I was packing up the apartment, Selena left a bunch of stuff behind, didn't care about taking it. And in one of her drawers I found a folder. He pulled a manila folder from his backpack, handed it to me. I opened it. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, notes in Selena's handwriting. And as I read through them, my blood went cold. EM is completely checked out, easy target. Richard's life insurance should have paid out by now. Probably sitting in accounts she's forgotten about. Dylan's too guilt-ridden about his dad to ask me hard questions. Can probably push this for at least a year before he grows a spine. Found another credit card in her desk. Business account. Limit of $100,000. She hasn't touched it in 6 months. Going to test with small purchase first. Long-term goal. Get power of attorney while she's still unstable. Position it as helping her manage affairs. Once we have that, we can liquidate assets without her knowledge. The notes went on. Page after page of calculated manipulation, cold clinical planning. She'd been documenting everything, tracking my emotional state, strategizing how to drain me completely, and this wasn't opportunistic theft. This was a long-term con. And the worst part, the thing that made my hands shake and my vision blur? There was a note at the bottom of the last page, dated 3 weeks before Richard died. Once he's gone, she'll be completely vulnerable. That's our window. She'd been waiting for my husband to die, waiting for the moment when I'd be at my weakest, planning how to exploit my grief before Richard was even in the ground. I looked up at Dylan. He was watching me with red-rimmed eyes. She was planning this the whole time, I whispered. Before your father even died, she was planning to destroy me. I know. His voice was hollow. "I found it 2 days ago. I've been trying to figure out what to do with it. And I realized I had to bring it to you, had to let you see that this was never about a few bad choices or financial stress. She targeted you, deliberately, systematically. And I was too stupid and too manipulated to see it. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was seeing. This woman had sat at my husband's funeral, had hugged me, had said all the right things about being there for me, and the whole time she'd been waiting for her opportunity to strike. Mom, I need you to know something." Dylan leaned forward, caught my eyes. "Everything you did, the ultimatum, the legal threats, all of it, I thought it was too harsh. Thought you were being cruel, but you were right about all of it. She was exactly what you said she was, and I'm so sorry I didn't believe you sooner." "Dylan, I'm going to pay you back every dollar," he interrupted. "Every single one. It's going to take time, but I'll do it, and I'll testify against her if you want to press criminal charges. I'll give statements. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Clarity. The fog of Selena's manipulation had lifted. The person sitting across from me was starting to look like the boy I'd raised instead of the stranger he'd become. "I don't want you to destroy your life trying to pay me back," I said. "I want you to rebuild, get therapy, figure out who you are without her, and yes, make restitution, but at a pace that doesn't kill you." What about the agreement, the 60-day deadline? I thought about Patricia's warnings, about justice and consequences and teaching lessons, about the part of me that still wanted Selena to face criminal charges for what she'd done. But I also thought about Dylan sitting in my office looking like Richard's ghost, trying desperately to make amends, bringing me evidence that must have shattered him when he found it. "We'll renegotiate," I said, "reasonable payments over reasonable time. No more killing yourself with 2 jobs. But Dylan, you need to understand something. I'm not doing this because I forgive everything. I'm doing this because you're my son, and you're finally being honest with me. That counts for something." "I don't deserve—" "No," I agreed. "You probably don't, but I'm your mother, and sometimes that means giving grace you haven't earned yet. You just have to prove you're worth it." He nodded, wiped his eyes. "What about Selena? Are you going to press charges?" I looked at the folder in my hands, at the evidence of months of calculated cruelty, at proof that this woman had seen my grief as an opportunity and my love for my son as a weakness to exploit. "Yes, Hans," I said, "I am, because someone who plans to destroy a grieving widow deserves to face consequences, and because if I don't, she'll do this to someone else. Another vulnerable woman, another family." "I'll help you," Dylan said, "whatever you need." We sat in my office as the afternoon light faded through the windows, making plans. Real plans, for the first time in years. How to approach the DA, what evidence to compile, how to protect Dylan from being charged as an accessory when he'd clearly been manipulated almost as badly as I had. It felt strange, wrong in some ways, sitting here with my son, plotting the legal destruction of his soon-to-be ex-wife, but also necessary, because Selena hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen time, trust, peace, the last months of Richard's life when I should have been focused on him instead of pretending I liked his future daughter-in-law. She'd calculated every move, had seen us not as people but as resources to be harvested. And now she was going to learn what happens when you underestimate a woman you thought was too broken to fight back. "Mom," Dylan's voice was soft, "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but when this is all over, when she's facing charges and I've paid you back and enough time has passed, do you think we could try again? Like actually try, not just going through the motions?" I looked at my son, at the hope and fear and exhaustion in his face, at the man trying to crawl out from under the rubble of the life he'd built with the wrong person. "Yeah," I said, "I think we could try." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. That would take time, work, probably therapy for both of us, but it was a start, a hairline crack of light in the darkness that had consumed us for months. And sitting there in my office with the evidence of Selena's betrayal spread across my desk, and my son finally on my side again. I felt something I hadn't felt since Richard died. Hope. Small, fragile, probably premature, but hope nonetheless. We weren't fixed, weren't even close. The road ahead was going to be brutal. Criminal proceedings, financial recovery, rebuilding trust that had been shattered into dust. But at least we'd be walking it together. At least we'd stopped being enemies. At least my son was home. Patricia called the DA's office the next morning. I sat in her conference room while she laid out the case on speakerphone, my hands folded in my lap, like I was waiting for a verdict instead of delivering one. We have documentation of systematic fraud spanning 8 months, Patricia said, her voice crisp and professional. Credit card theft, identity fraud, forgery of signatures on multiple occasions, total damages exceeding $87,000. And we have handwritten evidence showing premeditation and intent to exploit a vulnerable individual. The assistant DA, a woman named Karen Chen, who sounded younger than Dylan, asked the question I'd been dreading. And the victims are willing to testify? Mrs. Mercer is ready to provide a full statement, Patricia said. Her son, Dylan Mercer, has also agreed to cooperate as a witness. The son who was married to the defendant? Yes, he's since filed for divorce. He was manipulated by Miss Hart and is willing to testify to that effect. There was a pause on the other end of the line, papers rustling. Then, "This is solid. We can definitely move forward with charges. But I have to warn you, if the defendant has a good lawyer, they're going to paint Mrs. Mercer as a vindictive ex-mother-in-law. They'll argue the son had implied permission to use family funds. They'll make this about a family dispute, not criminal fraud." "Let them try," I said, speaking for the first time. "I have 8 months of statements showing charges I never authorized. I have her handwritten notes planning the theft, and I have the emotional wherewithal to sit in a courtroom and tell a jury exactly what she did." Another pause. Then Karen Chen said, "Okay, send me everything you've got. I'll review it with my supervisor, but I think we're looking at multiple felony counts. Ms. Hart should expect to be arrested within the week." After we hung up, Patricia looked at me with something that might have been respect or might have been concern. "Are you sure about this? Once we pull this trigger, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure. Even knowing it means Selena will likely face jail time, especially knowing that." Because here's what I'd realized, sitting in my office with Dylan the day before, reading through Selena's notes about waiting for my husband to die so she could rob me more effectively. This wasn't about the money anymore. Maybe it never had been. This was about making sure a predator didn't get to walk away clean and find another victim. This was about proving that vulnerable doesn't mean defenseless, that grief doesn't make you fair game, that there are consequences for seeing human suffering as opportunity. Patricia nodded. "Then let's burn her world down." The arrest happened on a Tuesday. I didn't witness it, didn't want to. But Dylan called me afterward, voice shaking. She was at work. They came to her office, walked her out in handcuffs in front of everyone. "How do you know?" Her sister called me, screaming, said this was all my fault, that I was a coward for turning on my own wife. He laughed, but it was bitter. Ex-wife, as of yesterday. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "Don't be. Her sister's just like her. They're both convinced the world owes them something." He was quiet for a moment. "Mom, she's going to come after you in court. Her lawyer's going to make you look like the villain." "Let them try." But Dylan was right to warn me, because 2 days later I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Mercer," a man's voice, smooth, professional. "This is Robert Garrison. I'm representing Selena Hart in her current legal matter. I was hoping we could have a conversation. I have nothing to say to you. I understand you're upset, but I think if we could just sit down. Your client stole from me while I was grieving my husband. She planned it, documented it, showed zero remorse. There's nothing to discuss." "Mrs. Mercer, Selena has made some mistakes. She acknowledges that, but criminal prosecution, prison time, that seems excessive for what amounts to a family financial dispute. It's not a dispute when one party is committing felonies. She's willing to make full restitution, he said quickly. Every dollar, plus interest. We can have the money to you within 30 days. All we're asking is that you consider dropping the criminal charges. I should have hung up, should have referred him to Patricia, but I needed him to hear this from me. Mr. Garrison, your client had notes describing how she was waiting for my husband to die so she could rob me more effectively. She saw terminal cancer as a business opportunity. So no, I'm not dropping the charges. Not for money, not for apologies, not for anything. Mrs. Mercer, tell your client she made a mistake when she assumed I was too broken to fight back. And tell her I'll see her in court. I hung up, hands shaking. Adrenaline coursing through me like electricity. Patricia called 10 minutes later. Garrison just called me. Said you refused his settlement offer. Damn right I did. Good. I could hear the smile in her voice. Because between you and me, they're scared. They wouldn't be offering full restitution if they thought they could win. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, life took on a surreal quality. Part courtroom drama, part family therapy, part something I didn't have words for. Dylan started coming to dinner once a week. Not because I demanded it, not because he owed me, but because he wanted to. We'd sit at my kitchen table and eat takeout, and try to remember how to talk to each other like family instead of adversaries. It was awkward, God, it was awkward. Long silences, conversations that died mid-sentence, topics we both avoided because they hurt too much to touch, but we kept showing up. That had to count for something. One night, about a week before the hearing, Dylan brought a box with him, set it on the table between us. I wanted to return these before everything gets more complicated. I opened the box. Inside were pieces of jewelry from the credit card statements. The Cartier bracelet, a Tiffany necklace, diamond earrings I'd never seen before. All of it sitting there in its original packaging, price tag still attached to some pieces. Selena left them in the apartment, Dylan said. When she moved out, she took her clothes and personal stuff, but left all the expensive things. I think she knew I'd have to sell them to pay you back. One last way to make me deal with the consequences of what we did. I picked up the bracelet, felt the weight of it. Probably cost more than most people made in a month. Did you know when she bought these? Some of them. She'd come home with shopping bags and say they were gifts from you, that you told her to treat herself, that you wanted her to have nice things. And I believed her because why wouldn't I? You'd always been generous. It never occurred to me that she was lying. When did you figure it out? The Paris trip. He looked down at his hands. That's when I knew something was wrong. She said you'd given her the credit card for emergencies and told her to use it for our anniversary trip. But when I suggested we call to thank you, she got weird about it. Said you'd been so out of it lately that a call might upset you. That we should just send a card, and you believed that too. I wanted to believe it, his voice cracked, because the alternative was that I'd married someone who was robbing you blind, and I'd have to admit Dad was right about her, and I couldn't. I just couldn't face that. I reached across the table, put my hand over his. Baby, your father wasn't right about everything. He was right about Selena, but he also believed you'd figure it out eventually. He had faith in you. I don't know how. I screwed up so badly. Because he was your father. And because faith isn't about what you've earned. It's about what someone hopes you'll become. We sat there for a while, not eating, not talking, just existing in the same space, without anger or accusations or the weight of everything we'd done to each other. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. A foundation maybe, a place to start building from. The night before the preliminary hearing, I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through everything that could go wrong. What if the judge dismissed the charges? What if Selena's lawyer convinced a jury I was a vindictive witch? What if this whole thing backfired and I came out looking like the villain? At 2 a.m. I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Made tea I didn't drink. Sat at the kitchen table where Richard and I used to sit every morning, reading the paper, planning our day, being ordinary in ways I'd taken for granted. I missed him with an ache so deep it felt like drowning. Not just because I was alone, though I was, painfully so, but because Richard would have known what to do, would have had some piece of wisdom or perspective or just a hand to hold that would have made this bearable, but Richard was gone, and I was here, and I had to figure this out myself. My phone buzzed, a text from Dylan. "Can't sleep either. Want company?" I texted back, "Come over." He showed up 20 minutes later in sweatpants and a hoodie, hair sticking up, looking like he'd aged backwards to the college kid who used to show up at my door at midnight when he was stressed about exams or girls or the future. We sat at the kitchen table with tea neither of us wanted and tried to pretend tomorrow wasn't going to change everything. "I'm scared," Dylan said finally. "What if this goes wrong? What if she gets off? What if the judge thinks we're wasting the court's time? Then we deal with it." But Dylan, even if the criminal case falls apart, we've already won the important part. We're sitting here together, talking. That wouldn't have happened if I just let this go. You think it was worth it? Everything that happened? I thought about that question. I really thought about it. The pain, the isolation, the months of grief compounded by betrayal, the loss of my relationship with my son, the fear that I destroyed what was left of my family to prove a point. "I think," I said slowly, "that sometimes the only way to save something is to burn away everything that's poisoning it. And yeah, it hurt. It's still hurting. But at least now we have a chance to build something real, something honest. We didn't have that before. Because I was lying to you. Because we were both pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I was pretending I was okay with how Selena treated me. You were pretending you didn't notice. And the whole thing was rotting from the inside." I looked at him across the table. "I don't regret forcing the truth out. I just regret how much it cost to get here." Dylan nodded, sipped his tea. "For what it's worth, Dad would be proud of you, for fighting back, for not letting her win." "You think?" "I know. He used to say you were the toughest person he'd ever met, that you had this core of steel underneath everything else, and people who underestimated you always regretted it." I felt tears prick my eyes. "He said that? All the time. Especially after you landed the Henderson account. Remember that? The one where their CEO said women didn't belong in consulting, and you walked in and destroyed his objections one by one until he signed the contract." I remembered. One of the best days of my professional life. Richard had taken me out to dinner to celebrate, and we'd laughed about the CEO's face when he realized I knew more about his company's problems than he did. "Your father was my biggest cheerleader," I said. "Even when I wanted to give up, he wouldn't let me. So don't give up now. Go in there tomorrow and show them the woman he saw, the one who doesn't back down, the one who fights for what's right, even when it's hard." The preliminary hearing started at 9 a.m. I wore the same navy suit I'd worn to Richard's funeral, not for superstition, but because it made me feel armored. Patricia met me outside the courthouse with last-minute instructions and reassurance I didn't quite believe. "Remember," she said, "this is just preliminary. The judge is determining if there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. You're not on trial here. Selena is. Will she be there? Yes, but don't look at her. Don't engage. Let me handle everything." We walked into the courtroom together. It was smaller than I expected. Fluorescent lights, worn carpet, the kind of place where hundreds of lives got decided in 15-minute increments. Dylan was already there, sitting in the back row, giving me a small wave when I walked in. And then Selena entered with her lawyer. I hadn't seen her since that day in my office. She looked different. Smaller somehow, hair pulled back, minimal makeup, wearing a conservative dress that screamed, "I'm not the villain here." Her lawyer, Robert Garrison, was exactly what I'd pictured. Expensive suit, slick smile, the kind of guy who'd defend anyone for the right price. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The bailiff called the case, and just like that, we were really doing this. The prosecutor, Karen Chen, who looked even younger in person, laid out the charges. credit card fraud, identity theft, forgery, each word landing like a hammer. Garrison objected to basically everything, arguing that this was a civil matter, that family members had implied permission to use shared resources, that Mrs. Mercer was simply vindictive after a contentious divorce between her son and his client. But then Karen presented the evidence, the credit card statements, the forged signatures, and finally the folder Dylan had found, Selena's notes, her planning, her calculated strategy to exploit a grieving widow. I watched Garrison's face as Karen read portions of those notes aloud, watched the confidence drain, watched him realize his client had lied to him about what this was. Your Honor, Karen said, the evidence is clear. Ms. Hart didn't make a mistake or misunderstand family dynamics. She planned and executed a systematic fraud targeting a vulnerable victim. This is exactly the kind of case that warrants criminal prosecution. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, read through the documents, flipped pages, took her time. The silence in that courtroom was suffocating. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Garrison, is your client prepared to make a statement? Garrison leaned over, whispered something to Selena. She shook her head. He whispered again, more urgently. She shook her head again, jaw set. No statement at this time, Your Honor, Garrison said. Very well. The judge looked at the evidence one more time. I find sufficient cause to bind this matter over for trial. Ms. Hart, you're being formally charged with 3 counts of credit card fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and 1 count of forgery. Bail is set at $50,000. Trial date will be set at arraignment. We're adjourned. The gavel came down. The gavel. Just like that, it was over. The preliminary hearing, at least. Selena was being formally charged. This was real now. Criminal. On the record. No more pretending this was just a family dispute. I watched as Selena stood up, her face completely blank. Watched as the bailiff explained the bail process. Watched as she turned and, for just a second, looked directly at me. The hatred in her eyes was pure, undiluted. If looks could kill, I would have dropped dead right there in that courtroom. But I didn't drop dead. I stood up straighter, met her gaze, and didn't look away until she did. Because that's what you do when someone tries to destroy you. You stare them down. You prove you're still standing. You show them that their worst couldn't break you. Outside the courthouse, Patricia was ecstatic. That went better than I expected. The judge didn't hesitate. She saw right through Garrison's arguments. What happens now? Now we wait for the arraignment. She'll formally enter a plea. If she pleads not guilty, which she will, we'll go to trial. That could take months. Are you prepared for that? Yes. Dylan caught up with us on the courthouse steps. Mom, I didn't expect it to be so fast. Neither did I. Her lawyer looked pissed. He should be, Patricia said. His client lied to him, made him walk into court with a defense that fell apart the second we presented evidence. Lawyers hate that. We stood there on the courthouse steps, the 3 of us watching people stream past, lawyers in expensive suits, defendants in cheap ones, families carrying the weight of whatever brought them here, the machinery of justice grinding through another day. I need coffee, Dylan said. Anyone want coffee? We went to a diner across from the courthouse, the same kind of place where Dylan and I had our first real confrontation, back when this was all just beginning. Vinyl booths, bad coffee, pie that looked like it had been there since morning. We ordered, sat in awkward silence. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I can't believe we actually did that, Dylan said. Like actually went through with criminal charges. Did you think I'd back down? I asked. Honestly, part of me hoped you would, that you'd accept repayment and let it go. He stirred his coffee. But I'm glad you didn't, because she needs to face consequences. Real ones, not just paying money back. You know she's going to make this ugly, right? I said, at trial. Her lawyer's going to paint me as a bitter old woman who couldn't accept her son's marriage, who used money as control, who destroyed a young couple's life out of spite. Let them try, Dylan said, echoing my words from weeks ago. Anyone who reads those notes will know exactly what she is. But I wasn't so sure. I'd seen enough courtrooms from the periphery during business disputes to know that truth and justice don't always overlap, that a good lawyer can twist facts into whatever narrative serves their client, that juries are unpredictable. Still, we'd come this far, no point backing down now. Patricia joined us for coffee, going over next steps. Preparation for trial, what testimony I'd need to give, how to handle cross-examination. It was overwhelming, technical, exhausting. But underneath the exhaustion was something else, something that felt almost like peace. Because whatever happened at trial, whatever verdict came down, I'd done what I set out to do. I'd refused to be a victim. I'd drawn boundaries. I'd made it clear that grief doesn't make you fair game, that age doesn't make you weak, that losing your husband doesn't mean losing your right to dignity and respect. And I'd gotten my son back. Not the son I'd lost, that Dylan was gone, replaced by someone more complicated, more damaged, more real, but a son nonetheless. One who was trying, one who'd chosen honesty even when it hurt, one who was sitting across from me in a diner, drinking bad coffee and trying to help me prepare for a trial against his ex-wife. Mom, Dylan's voice pulled me back. You okay? Yeah, I said, I'm okay. And for the first time in 8 months, I actually meant it. The arraignment happened 2 weeks later. Selena pleaded not guilty, as expected. Trial was set for 4 months out. Her bail was posted, not by her, I learned later, but by her parents, who apparently had money they'd never mentioned. Another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. She'd never needed to steal from me, never needed Dylan's money. She'd done it because she could, because I was vulnerable, because it was easier than working for what she wanted. The waiting was its own kind of torture. 4 months of knowing a trial was coming, 4 months of Selena out on bail, free to live her life while I prepared to testify about the worst period of mine. 4 months of second guessing, anxiety, and the slow creeping fear that this might all be for nothing. But I didn't wait passively. I worked, rebuilt my business, reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my grief. Started therapy, real therapy, not just the grief counseling I'd half-heartedly attended after Richard died. Started dealing with the fact that I'd been using anger at Selena to avoid processing my husband's death. That maybe some of my rage was displaced grief. That being wrong doesn't mean you're not also wounded in ways that have nothing to do with the wrongdoing. It was hard work, harder than anything I'd done professionally. Facing yourself, really facing yourself, not the curated version you show the world, is brutal. Admitting that you're not just strong and fierce and justified, but also scared and lonely and desperate for connection, even when you're pushing everyone away. But I did the work because I owed it to Richard, to Dylan, to myself. And slowly, painfully, something started to shift. The house didn't feel so empty. The silence didn't feel so suffocating. I started sleeping through the night again, started feeling like a person instead of a wound shaped like a woman. Dylan noticed. You seem different, he said one night over dinner. Lighter, maybe? Therapy, I said. Turns out 8 months of compounded grief and betrayal requires professional help. Who knew? He smiled. I started going too. My therapist says I have codependency issues and a pathological need to avoid conflict. Sounds about right. She also says I need to stop trying to fix things between you and me, that we need to just be, whatever that means. It means we stop performing, I said. Stop trying to be the perfect mother and son and just be the messy, complicated people we actually are. Can we do that? I don't know, but we can try. And we did, week after week, dinner after dinner. Some nights were good, some were terrible, some we barely spoke. Some we talked until midnight about everything and nothing. But we kept showing up. That was the important part. We kept choosing each other even when it was hard, even when the wounds were still raw. The trial date crept closer. 3 months, 2 months, 6 weeks. And then one random Wednesday afternoon, Patricia called with news that changed everything. Selena's lawyer reached out, she said. They want to negotiate a plea deal. I stood in Patricia's office staring at the words on her computer screen, like they were written in a language I'd forgotten how to read. A plea. Deal, I repeated. She wants to make a deal. Her lawyer knows they're going to lose a trial, Patricia said. The evidence is overwhelming. The notes alone would destroy any defense. So yes, they want to negotiate. What are they offering? Patricia pulled up the email. Guilty plea to 1 count of credit card fraud. The other charges dropped. 18 months probation, community service, full restitution, and a permanent restraining order, keeping her away from you and Dylan. No jail time. No jail time. I sat down hard in the chair across from her desk. So she gets to walk away. After everything, after planning to rob me while my husband was dying, after stealing almost $90,000, after destroying my relationship with my son, she gets probation and community service. The DA thinks it's a good deal, Patricia said carefully. It guarantees a conviction, guarantees restitution, guarantees she stays away from you. If we go to trial, there's always a chance a jury doesn't convict. Small chance, but it exists. This way you win, guaranteed. This doesn't feel like winning. I know. Patricia leaned back in her chair. But Evelyn, I need you to think practically. A trial means months more of this hanging over you. Means testifying, cross-examination, having your grief and your choices and your relationship with Dylan picked apart in public. It means Garrison standing in front of a jury, calling you vindictive and controlling and making Selena look like a victim of a bitter mother-in-law. You'll win. I'm confident of that. But at what cost? I stared at my hands. At the wedding ring I still wore, even though Richard had been gone almost a year now. What does Dylan think? I haven't told him yet. Wanted to talk to you first. I need to think about this. You have 48 hours. That's their deadline. I drove home in a fog, pulled into my driveway and just sat there in the car, engine off, watching the sun set through my windshield. 18 months probation, community service, a slap on the wrist for someone who'd systematically exploited my grief for her own gain. But Patricia was right about one thing. A trial would cost me, would drain me, would require me to relive the worst period of my life in excruciating detail in front of strangers who'd judge whether my pain was real enough, whether my reaction was justified enough, whether I was victim enough to deserve justice. And there was no guarantee. Juries were unpredictable. One person deciding I seemed too cold, too angry, too unforgiving. That's all it would take. One person thinking family should forgive family no matter what. One person who'd had a bad mother-in-law and projected that onto me. I called Dylan. Can you come over? I need to talk to you about something. He showed up 30 minutes later with Thai food neither of us had asked for but both needed. We ate in silence for a while, and I tried to figure out how to explain that the woman who destroyed his marriage might walk away with barely a slap. Selena's lawyer offered a plea deal, I said finally. 1 count of fraud, probation, community service, restitution, restraining order, no jail time. Dylan stopped eating. She gets to just walk away, essentially, after everything she did. After everything she did, he put his fork down, pushed his plate away. What are you going to do? I don't know. Patricia says it's a good deal. Guarantees a conviction, guarantees I get my money back, guarantees she stays away from us. But it doesn't feel like justice. Because it's not. Dylan's voice was hard. Justice would be her facing the same consequences anyone else would face for stealing $90,000. Justice would be her in jail, not doing community service at some non-profit where she'll probably charm everyone into thinking she's a victim. But a trial. I know what a trial means, Mom. I know it would be hard on you. But you didn't start this fight to take the easy way out at the end. You started it because you refused to let her win, because you refused to be a victim. He looked at me across the table. If you take this deal, she still wins. Maybe not completely, but enough. She gets to avoid real consequences, gets to tell herself and everyone else that it wasn't that bad, that she got probation for a technicality, that her angry ex-mother-in-law blew everything out of proportion. And if we go to trial and lose, then at least we fought. At least we didn't let her off easy. He reached across the table, took my hand. Mom, I know you're tired. I know this has been brutal, but you've come this far. Don't stop now. I wanted to argue with him, wanted to say I was done fighting, done sacrificing my peace for the satisfaction of watching Selena face consequences. Wanted to take the easy path and move on with my life. But he was right. If I took this plea deal, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if I'd settled for too little, if I'd let fear of a trial make me accept crumbs of justice when I deserved the whole meal. Okay, I said, we go to trial. Dylan squeezed my hand. You sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. I called Patricia the next morning and told her to reject the plea deal. She tried one more time to convince me otherwise. Evelyn, think about what you're choosing here, but I'd made my decision. Tell them we'll see them in court, I said. All right, but when Garrison tears into you on the stand, remember you chose this. I'll remember. The trial started on a Monday in October. Almost exactly a year since Richard died. Almost exactly a year since my life had collapsed, and I'd become the kind of woman who could be exploited, who'd been so consumed by grief that I'd missed my own money being stolen, my own son being manipulated, my own life being dismantled piece by piece. But I wasn't that woman anymore. And as I walked into that courtroom in my navy suit with my head high, I needed Selena to see that, needed the jury to see that, needed everyone to understand that grief doesn't equal weakness, that vulnerability isn't the same as helplessness, that predators always underestimate the people they target until it's too late. Jury selection took 2 days, 12 people and 2 alternates who'd decide whether Selena had committed a crime or just participated in a messy family dispute. I watched them file in, a mix of ages, backgrounds, faces that gave nothing away, and wondered which ones would believe me. Opening statements were brutal. Karen Chen laid out the prosecution's case methodically, the timeline, the forged signatures, the systematic theft, the handwritten evidence of premeditation. She painted Selena as a calculating predator who targeted a grieving widow. Then Garrison stood up and destroyed me. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, pacing in front of the jury box, this case is about a bitter family dispute dressed up as a crime. You're going to hear testimony from Evelyn Mercer, a woman who couldn't accept her son's marriage, who resented being replaced in Dylan's affections, who used her wealth as a weapon to control and manipulate. And when her control slipped, when Dylan chose his wife over his mother, she decided to punish them both. I sat there listening to him describe me as a vindictive harridan and forced myself not to react, not to show emotion, not to give him ammunition. You'll hear about credit card charges, Garrison continued. And yes, Selena Hart used a family credit card, but she did so with the implicit permission of her husband, Dylan Mercer, who had access to those accounts through his mother. This wasn't theft. This was a son helping his wife and a mother who decided that constituted a crime because she didn't approve of the marriage. It was a good strategy. I hated how good it was. Paint me as the villain, Selena as the victim, Dylan as caught in the middle. Make this about family drama instead of criminal fraud. But then Karen stood up for her first witness. The prosecution calls Dylan Mercer. I watched my son walk to the witness stand, watched him swear to tell the truth, watched him sit down and look directly at Selena for the first time since she'd been arrested. Karen started gently. Mr. Mercer, how long were you married to the defendant? 3 years. We divorced 2 months ago. And during your marriage, did you have access to your mother's credit card accounts? No. My mother had business accounts that I wasn't on. I didn't have cards, didn't have account numbers, didn't have authorization to use them. Did you give your wife permission to use those accounts? No. Did you know she was using them? Dylan looked down. Not at first. By the time I figured out what was happening, it had been going on for months, and I didn't know how to stop it without admitting I'd let it happen. Garrison objected. The judge sustained, but the jury had heard it. Had heard my son admit he'd been complicit through inaction, through fear, through manipulation. Karen continued, Mr. Mercer, I'm showing you what's been marked as Prosecution Exhibit 7. Can you identify this? Dylan looked at the document. It's a folder I found in Selena's belongings after we separated. Notes she'd written about targeting my mother financially. Can you read the highlighted portion? Dylan's voice shook as he read. Once Richard dies, EM will be completely vulnerable. That's our window. The courtroom was dead silent. Mr. Mercer, who is Richard? My father. He died of cancer last October. And EM? My mother, Evelyn Mercer. Karen let that sink in. Let the jury absorb what they'd just heard. That Selena had been planning to exploit my grief before Richard was even gone. That she'd seen terminal cancer as opportunity. No further questions. Garrison stood up for cross-examination like a shark scenting blood. Mr. Mercer, isn't it true that you and your mother had a strained relationship after your father's death? Yes. Isn't it true that you felt she was overbearing and controlling? That's what Selena told me. I believed her at the time, but you don't anymore. No, now I understand she was manipulating me, isolating me from my mother so she could rob her without interference. Or, Garrison said smoothly, you've decided to side with your mother now that your marriage is over and you need to repair that relationship. Isn't it possible you're changing your story to match what your mother wants to hear? No, I'm telling the truth, finally. Garrison spent another 20 minutes trying to break Dylan down, trying to make him admit he'd given Selena permission, trying to paint him as an unreliable witness influenced by his mother. But Dylan held firm, kept his answers simple, kept pointing back to the evidence. By the time Garrison sat down, I could see frustration in his face. Dylan had been better than expected, stronger than expected, had refused to be bullied or confused or turned into something he wasn't. When court adjourned for the day, Dylan found me in the hallway. How'd I do? You were perfect. I was terrified. You were perfect and terrified. Both can be true. He smiled. It was small, tired, but real. 1 day down. 1 day down. The trial lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks of testimony, evidence, experts explaining fraud patterns, and credit card security and psychological manipulation. 2 weeks of watching Selena sit at the defense table looking innocent and wronged, while her lawyer painted me as a villain and her as a victim of my cruelty. And then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand on a Tuesday morning and swore to tell the truth, and tried not to think about the fact that 12 strangers were about to hear the worst parts of my life laid out like evidence at a crime scene. Karen started with the basics. My background, my marriage, Richard's illness and death, my relationship with Dylan. She built a foundation of who I was before Selena, a successful businesswoman, a devoted wife, a mother who'd built a good life and then lost half of it when cancer took her husband. Then she moved to the theft. Mrs. Mercer, when did you first realize money was being taken from your accounts? When I received a credit card statement showing over $50,000 in charges I hadn't made. How did you feel when you saw that statement? Devastated, betrayed, but mostly stupid, because I should have noticed, should have been paying attention. But I was so consumed by grief that I'd stopped tracking things, stopped caring about anything except getting through each day. And Selena saw that vulnerability and exploited it. Garrison objected. Speculation about Ms. Hart's state of mind. Sustained. Karen adjusted. Mrs. Mercer, I'm showing you Prosecution Exhibit 7, the notes found by your son. Can you read the section dated March 15th? I looked at the page, at Selena's handwriting documenting my grief like it was market research. EM barely leaves the house anymore, hasn't checked bank statements in months. Depression making her sloppy, easy target. My voice broke on those last 2 words, easy target. That's what I'd been. That's what grief had made me. How did reading those notes make you feel? Karen asked gently. Like I'd been hunted, Like my husband's death was just an opportunity for someone to rob me. Like the worst moment of my life was someone else's business plan. Several jurors looked at Selena when I said that. Their faces told me everything I needed to know about whether they believed me. Karen walked me through the rest. Discovering the fraud, confronting Dylan, making the decision to press charges. And then she asked the question I'd been dreading. Mrs. Mercer, the defense has argued that you pursued criminal charges because you wanted to punish your son's wife, not because a crime was committed. How do you respond to that? I looked directly at the jury. I pursued charges because what she did was wrong. Not just legally wrong, morally wrong. She saw a woman at her lowest point and decided to take advantage. And if I'd let that go, if I'd accepted her excuses and justifications, I'd have been teaching my son that it's okay to hurt people when they're vulnerable. That family can abuse family as long as they apologize afterward. That being a victim is something you just accept instead of something you fight against. I took a breath. I didn't press charges to punish her. I pressed charges because crimes have consequences, even when the victim is too grief-stricken to notice she's being robbed. No further questions. Then came Garrison's cross-examination, and he didn't hold back. Mrs. Mercer, isn't it true that you never liked your daughter-in-law? We weren't close. No. In fact, you made her feel unwelcome in your family, didn't you? I tried to include her. She wasn't interested. Or maybe you made it clear she'd never be good enough for your son. Garrison paced in front of me. Maybe you resented that Dylan had found someone who made him happy, someone who wasn't you. That's not true, isn't it? You've testified that after your husband died, you became depressed, isolated, and your son had just gotten married, was starting his own life, and wasn't available to take care of you the way you wanted. That must have made you angry. I wasn't angry that Dylan had his own life. I was angry that his wife was stealing from me. Or maybe you saw some credit card charges, made assumptions, and decided to weaponize your wealth to destroy a marriage you'd never approved of in the first place. I saw evidence of systematic fraud, I said firmly, and I chose not to be a victim. A victim? Garrison smiled like he'd been waiting for that word. Mrs. Mercer, you run a successful consulting firm. You have significant assets. You're an educated, intelligent woman. You're not a victim. You're a wealthy woman who decided to punish her former daughter-in-law for having the audacity to access family money. She didn't access family money. She forged my signature and stole from my business accounts. Accounts your son had knowledge of. Accounts in a family business. Where exactly is the line between family helping family and crime? The line is consent, I said. The line is permission. The line is not waiting for someone's husband to die so you can rob them more effectively. Garrison objected. The judge sustained. But again, the jury had heard it. He tried for another hour to break me down, to make me admit I was vindictive or controlling or lying. But I'd been preparing for this, had practiced with Karen, had gone through every possible attack and figured out how to respond. And more than that, I knew I was telling the truth. That's a kind of armor nothing can penetrate. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, my legs were shaking and my head was pounding, but I was still standing, still intact. The trial concluded with closing arguments. Karen laid out the evidence one more time, methodical, damning, impossible to refute. Garrison made one last attempt to paint me as the villain, to argue that this was family drama, not criminal activity. And then we waited. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. 6 hours of sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom with Patricia and Dylan, not talking, just waiting for 12 strangers to decide whether I'd been robbed, or whether I was just a bitter ex-mother-in-law making trouble. When the bailiff finally came out and said the jury had reached a verdict, my heart nearly stopped. We filed back into the courtroom, took our seats, watched the jury file in with faces that gave nothing away. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. The foreman, an older man who reminded me of Richard, stood up. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of credit card fraud in the first count, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of credit card fraud in the second count?" "Guilty." On the charge of identity theft, guilty. All the charges, every single one, guilty on all counts. I heard Selena make a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Heard her lawyer whisper urgently, but I couldn't look at her, could only sit there feeling like the ground had finally stopped shifting under my feet. Dylan grabbed my hand, squeezed so hard it hurt. Patricia leaned over and whispered, "You did it." The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks out and adjourned. And just like that, it was over. The trial, the waiting, the uncertainty, finished. We walked out of that courthouse into afternoon sunshine, and I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Free. Not happy. Not victorious. Just free from the weight I'd been carrying. Free from the constant question of whether I'd done the right thing. Free from the fear that Selena would face no consequences for what she'd done. "We should celebrate," Patricia said. This was a decisive win. But I didn't want to celebrate. Didn't want to toast to destroying someone's life, even if they tried to destroy mine first. I just wanted to go home. Wanted to sit in my house and process what had just happened. Wanted to finally let myself believe it was really over. Dylan drove me home. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? We'd won. The jury had believed us. Justice, for whatever that was worth, had been served. At my house, he helped me out of my coat like I was made of glass. "You should rest." "I'm fine." "Mom, you're not fine. You just spent 2 weeks on trial. You're allowed to not be fine." I smiled. "When did you get so smart?" "I had a good teacher." He hugged me then. Really hugged me, the way he used to before Selena, before grief, before everything fell apart. "I'm proud of you. Dad would be proud of you too." That's when I cried. Not for the verdict, not for the vindication, but for my son telling me Richard would be proud, and knowing it was true, and feeling like maybe we'd finally made it through to the other side of this nightmare. The sentencing hearing was anticlimactic after the trial. The judge gave Selena 3 years in prison, not the maximum, but enough to matter. Enough to be real consequences instead of a slap on the wrist. She'd serve probably 18 months with good behavior. She'd have a felony record forever. She'd be a cautionary tale instead of a success story. I didn't go to the sentencing. Didn't need to watch her be led away in handcuffs. That wasn't about justice anymore. That was about revenge. And I'd learned the difference between the two. Instead, I spent the day in my office working on a proposal for a new client. Living my life. Moving forward. Dylan called afterward. 3 years, the judge said her premeditation and targeting of a vulnerable victim warranted serious consequences. Good. You don't sound satisfied. I don't need to be satisfied. I need to move on. And that's what I did. Over the weeks and months that followed, I rebuilt. Not just my business or my relationship with Dylan, rebuilt myself. The version of me that had existed before Richard died, before Selena, before I learned that grief makes you vulnerable in ways you can't predict or defend against. I sold the house. That big empty space with too many memories and too many rooms I never went into. Bought a smaller place on the waterfront with huge windows and enough space for me without being overwhelming. Decorated it exactly how I wanted. Not how Richard would have wanted, not trying to recreate what we'd had, but building something new, something that was entirely mine. Dylan helped me move, unpacked boxes and hung pictures and made jokes about my terrible taste in throw pillows. We ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor of my new living room because I hadn't bought furniture yet, and he said, "This feels right, this place. You starting over?" I'm not starting over, I'm just continuing in a different direction. Dad would love that you're by the water. He always talked about retiring somewhere you could see the ocean. I know, that's why I bought it. Richard was everywhere in my new life, but not in a haunting way. In a way that felt like he was still part of my story, even though he'd left the narrative early. His books on my shelves. His favorite coffee mug that I still used every morning. Photos of us scattered through the house, mixed with newer photos of Dylan and me, slowly learning how to be family again. The restitution came through in installments over 6 months. Every dollar I'd been stolen, returned. I donated it, all of it, to a non-profit that helps women recovering from domestic abuse, financial exploitation, elder fraud, because I didn't want that money, didn't want the reminder of what it represented, but I could transform it into something that helped other people avoid becoming victims, could turn my worst experience into someone else's lifeline. Dylan protested, "Mom, that's your money. You earned it. She stole it from you. And now I'm choosing what to do with it. This feels right. You're a better person than I am." No, I'm just a person who learned that holding on to anger and wanting revenge and needing to win, those things cost more than they're worth. I got justice. I got my son back. I got my life back. The money is just money. When did you get so wise? Therapy and spite, baby. Powerful combination. He laughed. And I realized that was something we did now. Laughed together, made jokes, had the kind of easy relationship I thought was gone forever. We weren't perfect, still had hard days, still had moments where the past rose up and reminded us of everything we'd lost and everything we'd done to each other in the aftermath. But we were trying. That had to count for something. I learned things through all of this, hard things, things I wish I could have learned some other way, but probably wouldn't have. I learned that grief makes you vulnerable in ways you can't predict, that predators see vulnerability as opportunity, that family can hurt you worse than strangers because they know exactly where the soft spots are. I learned that fighting back costs something, peace, energy, relationships, the version of yourself that still believes the world is basically fair. But not fighting back costs more. Costs your dignity, your sense of self, your belief that you have the right to demand better treatment. I learned that justice and healing aren't the same thing. You can win in court and still lose parts of yourself you'll never get back. But you can also lose people you thought were permanent and discover you're strong enough to survive their absence. I learned that love, real love, not the conditional kind where affection depends on compliance, has to include boundaries, has to include the willingness to say this behavior is unacceptable even when it means conflict, has to include protecting yourself even when it means disappointing someone you care about. Most importantly, I learned that you can't buy love, not with money, not with sacrifice, not with tolerance of bad behavior in exchange for scraps of affection. Either someone values you for who you are or they don't, and pretending they do, accepting crumbs and calling it a feast, only makes you smaller. A year after the trial, Dylan showed up at my house with a woman, not a new girlfriend. His therapist had told him to stay single for a while, work on himself, figure out who he was without someone else defining him. Just a friend, someone he worked with, someone normal and kind who laughed at his jokes and didn't look at me like I was an obstacle to be managed. "Mom, this is Jessica. She wanted to meet you. I've told her about everything, the trial, Selena, all of it. She knows the whole story." I shook Jessica's hand and she said, "Dylan talks about you all the time, about how you taught him that standing up for yourself isn't the same as being cruel, that boundaries are acts of love, not punishment." I looked at my son, at the man he'd become through all of this, scarred, yes, but also stronger, clearer, more himself than he'd been in years. "Did I teach you that?" I asked. "You did, by example." We had dinner on my deck overlooking the water, watched the sun set, talked about normal things, work, books, plans for the holidays, the kind of conversation that's boring and beautiful precisely because it's ordinary, because ordinary means we've survived the extraordinary and come out the other side. After Jessica left, Dylan stayed to help clean up. We stood at my sink washing dishes, him washing, me drying, the rhythm comfortable and familiar, and he said, "I never apologized properly for everything, for letting Selena manipulate me, for not seeing what she was doing to you, for choosing her over you for so long. You've apologized, not enough, not in a way that captures how sorry I am, how much I regret it, how I'd give anything to go back and do it differently." I put down the dish towel, turned to face him. "Dylan, we can't go back. We can only go forward. And forward means accepting that we both made mistakes. You for being manipulated, Me for letting grief make me blind. Both of us for letting someone else's poison seep into our relationship. But you didn't. I did. I let Selena's treatment of me slide for years because I was afraid of losing you. That's on me. I should have set boundaries sooner, should have demanded respect instead of accepting scraps, should have trusted that our relationship was strong enough to survive conflict. I touched his face. We both learned hard lessons, but we learned them. That's what matters. I miss Dad, he said suddenly, every day, and I keep thinking he'd know what to say right now, something wise about forgiveness or moving forward, or he'd say you're doing fine, that we both are, and he'd be right. Dylan hugged me then, and I held my son and looked out at the water and thought about Richard and everything we'd built together and everything I'd had to fight to keep after he was gone. I thought about Selena, serving time in a prison somewhere, facing the consequences of seeing human grief as exploitable weakness. I didn't hate her anymore, didn't waste energy on anger or wishes for her suffering. She was just someone who'd made terrible choices and was paying for them. A cautionary tale. A lesson in what happens when you mistake vulnerability for weakness. I thought about the version of myself who'd opened that credit card statement a year and a half ago. The woman who'd been so broken by loss that she'd missed her own life being stolen. I barely recognized her anymore. Not because I'd healed, grief doesn't work that way, but because I'd transformed. Had let pain turn into strength instead of defeat, had refused to let being hurt turn me into someone small and scared and helpless. And I thought about the future, my future. Not Richard's widow or Dylan's mother or Selena's victim, but Evelyn Mercer. Businesswoman, fighter, survivor. Woman who learned the hard way that the only person responsible for protecting your dignity is you. That family doesn't mean accepting abuse. That getting older doesn't mean accepting being diminished. That there's freedom in refusing to be a victim even when victimhood would be easier. Mom? Dylan's voice pulled me back. Where'd you go? Just thinking. About? About how far we've come, how much we've survived, how proud I am of us. Even though it almost destroyed us, especially because of that, easy relationships don't teach you anything. We learned everything the hard way, how to fight, how to forgive, how to rebuild. And we did it. We're still here, still family, still choosing each other even when it's hard. I'll always choose you now, Dylan said. I promise. Don't promise that. Just promise to be honest, to speak up when something's wrong, to protect yourself the way I should have taught you to years ago. That's all I need. He nodded. I can do that. After he left, I stood on my deck alone, watching lights reflect on the water, feeling the ocean breeze on my face. Somewhere in the distance, a boat's horn sounded, life continuing, normal and ordinary and beautiful. I wasn't the woman I'd been before Richard died. Wasn't the woman I'd been when Selena was robbing me blind. Wasn't even the woman who'd walked into that courtroom determined to prove she wasn't weak. I was someone new, someone forged in grief and betrayal and the choice to fight back. Someone who'd learned that strength isn't about never being vulnerable. It's about refusing to let vulnerability be your defining characteristic. Someone who knew now that the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's building a life so good, so full, so completely yours that their absence doesn't diminish you. It reveals how little space they deserved in the first place. I went aside, made tea, sat in my living room with its huge windows and its view of the water and its carefully chosen furniture that Richard had never seen but would have loved, opened my laptop and started drafting a proposal for a new client, living my life, doing my work, being exactly who I'd fought so hard to remain. And somewhere in the middle of typing, I realized I was happy, not in a dramatic, overwhelming way, not erasing the grief or the scars or the permanent changes that loss creates. Just content, satisfied with my choices, proud of what I'd survived, grateful for what remained. That's the thing they don't tell you about surviving betrayal. The victory isn't dramatic, isn't a moment of triumph where everything suddenly makes sense. It's quiet, it's ordinary. It's sitting in your living room working on a Tuesday night and realizing you're okay. that you rebuilt, that you're standing on solid ground again even though you once thought you'd drown. I thought about Selena one last time that night, not with anger, not with satisfaction at her conviction, just with a kind of distant pity for someone who'd never understand that you can't build a life on other people's pain, that taking from the vulnerable doesn't make you strong, it makes you hollow, that real power comes from lifting yourself up, not pushing others down. She tried to destroy me when I was at my weakest, had calculated and planned and executed a campaign to drain me dry, and she'd failed. Not because I was unbreakable, I'd been very, very broken, but because broken things can be rebuilt, can be made stronger at the fractured places, can become something new and fierce and unwilling to ever be an easy target again. I'd won. Not just the trial, not just the restitution, not just getting my son back. I'd won by surviving, by refusing to let being hurt turn me into something smaller than I was, by standing up and saying no more when it would have been easier to accept defeat. That's what I want you to understand. Anyone who's listening to this story, anyone who's been hurt by family, robbed by people they trusted, made vulnerable by grief or age or loss, you have the right to fight back, the right to demand consequences, the right to protect yourself even when people tell you you're being unreasonable or vindictive or unable to forgive. Forgiveness is a gift you give when it's earned, not a debt you owe to people who've wronged you. Boundaries are acts of self-respect, not cruelty. And refusing to be a victim doesn't make you harsh, it makes you human. I learned all of that the hard way, lost time and peace and relationships to learn it. But I learned it, and now I'm standing here alive, whole, free, because I refused to let the worst thing that happened to me define the rest of my life. That's my victory. Not the courtroom verdict, not the prison sentence, not the money returned. My victory is that I'm still here, still standing, still Evelyn Mercer, and nothing, not grief, not betrayal, not the cruelest intentions of people who saw my pain as opportunity, could take that away from me, because I wouldn't let them. And if you're facing something similar, something that's trying to break you, trying to make you believe you're too weak or too old or too broken to fight back, know this. You're stronger than they think, stronger than you think. And the act of standing up, of refusing to accept mistreatment, of demanding the dignity you deserve, that act alone changes you. It changed me. And I wouldn't trade who I became for anything, not even to erase the pain that made me.